Hello everyone, welcome back to Stance Brothers. We're working on my car today. This is a 2002 Saturn SL2. I've been driving it lowered for the last 2 years, and it's dropped about 6 inches from stock ride height. Since that time I've gone through like 3 sets of CV axles, motor mounts, and torque struts. So I reached out to a couple of guys within the Saturn community, Apex the Courier and Slow Saturn, and just asked them what they dealt with. They've also been in the aftermarket mods for a long time with Saturns. And so they recommended raising the motor to keep the CV axles from binding and to relieve some of that pressure that came with lowering it so much. So that's what we've been working on over the last several weeks.
This is what a stock torque strut looks like. And you can see that it's holding together. But what you can't see there is this weak spot right there at that seam. Let me show you what happens with some competitive shifting. These stock torque struts blow up. That seam just does not hold. And then what happens is this torque strut rubs against the boot on the CV axle and rips it open. And we've had that happen a number of times. And when the engine twists, when the torque strut breaks and the engine twists, then you end up with this kind of damage on the transmission mount or perhaps the motor mount. The transmission mount is smaller and is probably going to go first because of the uncontrolled twisting. That's actually a good thing because you certainly wouldn't want your transmission case to break. If anything's going to break, let's have the mount break. $30 replacement part, no big deal. So it became obvious to us that we needed to raise the engine, as these other folks have said. And we also needed to strengthen the torque struts because the stock struts just were useless. So we went out and we bought some 2-inch material to raise the engine, just like we had heard about. We got this is a 2-inch by 2-inch square tube, 3/16 of an inch thick. That's probably overkill, but it's okay. I've also got some 2-inch by 3-inch rectangular stock. We had the parts made, went to install them, and discovered that the passenger side went in just fine. When we went to install the spacer block underneath the transmission, we found that it was too big and we couldn't do it. The case of the transmission was hitting this section of the frame rail. And so we discovered that we could only raise this 1.5 inches comfortably. With the plasma cutter, we cut out 1/2 inch on both sides of the tubing, and then we were able to weld it back together at 1.5 inches. So let me show you what we did for the transmission mount. We used urethane to make some end blocks there. We'll explain more about that in a minute. And made a template so that we get the holes lined up exactly where they need to be, so that we're literally just lifting the engine straight up. And this will bolt right into the frame exactly where the transmission mount was installed. Same thing with the motor mount. And again, just lifting it straight up, we welded some new studs to this spacer block. There's holes underneath here where the original bolts are going to go up in there. And we'll be able to have access to the bolts through the ends of this. Now let me explain a little bit about the torque struts. When the torque strut breaks, you lose your drive shaft because it slices the boot open. The engine torques too much. You break the transmission mount, maybe break the motor mount. So we need really stout torque struts to keep this engine from moving much. We do want a little bit, but not much. So what we did, we got some urethane, and I fabricated a new torque strut. And it's adjustable. Right now it's tightened down exactly where it needs to be. But if I needed to adjust it, I could. I just loosen up the lock nuts, turn the center section, and the strut can get longer or shorter as necessary. And we use that urethane and put it inside here for a little bit of cushioning during shifting. As we were building these spacer blocks and torque struts, we were concerned about some potential issues we might run into. One thing that we were concerned about was this air intake. Obviously it's raised up now. Would it be hitting the firewall here? When we got the spacers installed, it was not. It was close, but it was not hitting. Certainly with the original torque struts, it would definitely hit. The engine would rock too much and hit. But I don't think that this engine's going to go far with those custom torque struts. Another question was the radiator hoses. Raising it, would that kink the radiator hoses? And we were happy to see that it did not kink any hoses. All right, well that's it. Let's get these parts installed. All right, since we've got the jack underneath the transmission side of the car, we're going to start with the spacer block and the transmission mount. We need to mount the transmission mount to the spacer block before we can install them. Then once it's mounted together, then we'll install both of them as an assembly. All right, that's in place. We're gonna just finger tight. We're gonna get the other one in there. A little bit challenging because of the small spaces to work in here. There. Oh, look at that. That went right in. Good. Since I can't see what I'm doing, I'm gonna put this nut inside this wrench like this. All right, let's try that again. You can see that we made two towers, kind of like little log cabins out of 4x4s, and we supported the engine with that. Once we got up higher to the engine, of course, you can't keep putting 4x4s under. We got 2x4s, we got little pieces of 1x and little slivers of plywood, whatever it takes to get this engine up to the correct height. This side is mounted. Later on, we'll put the end caps in, I think. Well, let's do that right now, all right? Okay, so we're going to put these urethane end caps back in now. They're simply held in with these little sheet metal screws. And then this side will be done. I think that's going to work. Okay, that side's done. Let's go do the other side. In the original design, when we used the 2-inch spacer blocks, I could leave the stock bolts at their stock height. But when we trimmed the spacer down to 1.5 inches, I also had to trim down the original bolts there so that they would fit inside of this block. This is a bit tricky getting these nuts in here. Again, it's kind of blind, but I know that I don't want to put the block all the way down quite yet. I want to leave it loose. There we go. Now, with these tight spaces to work in, it seemed to me that I needed a special tool to get these nuts tightened down. So I took a 15mm wrench that's been in my toolbox for about 35 years. Put a little heat on it, bent it, and it works great. I left the nuts loose so that it can move around a little bit as we're getting things lined up. Because remember, this thing was up on 4x4 blocks, and so it's not where it will end up finally. As we work on it, it will gradually go back into place where it belongs. So I'm gonna lower this down on here like this, and then you gotta adjust it a little bit to make it slide down on there. Now, hopefully, we can get this to rise up into position just by turning these nuts. Before I go any further, I want to put these nuts on here. I'm going to loosen that up just a little bit. There, things are loose, and that's helpful to getting things lined up. We may have to go underneath and put some pressure on it. We do. I'm just going to put a little pressure there and push down on the handle, which is going to lift the engine a little bit, and then that gives me enough threads showing here to be able to get these nuts started. All right, so now we're just going to slowly, gently, evenly tighten up these bolts, and it's just gradually lifting the engine. I always try to start nuts by hand, using my fingers, of course. That way you know you don't have the threads cross-threaded. We've got these nuts snugged down here, and read on a Saturn forum that the torque specs for these nuts are 37 pounds, so that won't take much. The next ones we'll do will be these, and since I made these, I guess I can make the torque specs, and that's good right there. You know, I tightened that up pretty good. A lot of leverage right there, 25 pounds. Now, here's the one that's going to be most interesting, and we're going to use our specially designed torque wrench to do these, and our other torque wrench extension. 37 foot-pounds. Let's try this one. 35, 36, 37 foot-pounds right there. Okay, the motor mounts are in. I got so excited about getting this job done that we got this motor mount put in place, torqued right to specs, and then I realized we forgot to put in the end cap. And that end cap is held in with a screw that goes underneath the motor mount. So we're going to leave this block where it is, because we know that that's where it belongs. I'll take all this off, put the end caps in, screw them in, and then put this all back on again, and it won't take long, just a few minutes. As we were doing this, I looked down here and I noticed that there's a potential, maybe, I don't know, for the bolts on that pulley to interfere with bolts on this piece of the bracket that holds the motor mounts on. So what we're going to do, we're going to turn this engine over by hand and just see what happens. Make sure, okay, it looks like we've got some good clearance. And we're going to put the torque struts on still, and I know that that's going to tip the engine backwards from where it is presently a little bit more too. So that's going to give us a little bit more clearance. What we're looking at here is, do we have enough clearance between the power steering pump and the firewall? It wiggles just like that, and it looks good. But don't worry, once we get these new torque struts on there, it ain't going to move. Torqued right to specs as always. There we are. Sick. Super sick. Let's race. Oh, we need a battery first. They're overrated, right? Extremely slight interference there. Nothing to worry about. It definitely does not interfere with the actual torque strut, just the end of the torque strut bolt, that's all. There's that little nipple for the vent. So that's just too close to this battery tray. I was hoping that maybe it was something that threaded in there, but it looks like it's something that gets pressed in there. Here's the original vent tube where it sticks up out of the top of the transmission, and we just simply pulled that off of there, and I pulled the vent out of the little rubber tube, and I made a rubber tube with an elbow, a couple of elbows, and I'll show you where this is going to attach. It's actually going to attach on the back side of the battery tray. There's a clip there for holding a wire loom that's not used, and it works perfectly for this. So this will go right back down on there, and that's all the modification that we had to do to get this battery tray to fit with the engine and transmission raised. Snip that. Well, we've got the battery back in, and the air cleaner parts are all back in. Everything fits nicely. We've got that vent tube hooked up on the back side of the battery tray. One other thing that we had to do because of raising the engine and transmission was we had to raise the hood. The engine lifted up about, well, we raised it 1.5 inches, and the hood would not close because of that. So what we did was, for a temporary fix, we cut up some 2x4 blocks and put them underneath the hood hinges right here. We had to get some extra long bolts to fit in there. But nice thing is the hood still shuts nicely, even with those blocks in there. And so we're getting closer to being able to take this out on the road and give it that test drive. Now, we have to put the wheels back on it and take it for a ride.
Is this rolling? Well, on behalf of Pop's Shop and me and Big Ben and Stance Brothers, I'd like to thank all of you for watching. What is it? Like, comment, and subscribe?
Yes.
Yeah, if you have any questions, seriously though, feel free to drop them in the comments. We'll get back to you. And if this was helpful at all, we'd love to hear how it helped you out. That's it. Thank you for watching.
Go up there.
Me?
And walk down toward me and give me a big high five. And then we'll
Probably looks great.
I'm sure it does.
I'm sure it does too. Yeah, that's a wrap. Dab me up. You go like this. No. Once you get it, just like that, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Nice. Cool trick, Pop.